He went in expecting lab results and a few routine questions. Instead, he came face to face with the woman he left behind and the life he never knew he lost. For Nathaniel Moore, hospitals were an inconvenience, nothing more. Another obligation squeezed between board meetings and international calls. His private physician had insisted after weeks of unexplained fatigue, citing stress, overwork, and numbers that needed checking. Nathaniel had agreed only because refusing would raise questions he didn't have time to answer. The drive there had been silent. His phone buzzed constantly, unread messages stacking up as the sleek glass structure of the private medical center rose into view. Clean lines. Discretion. Excellence. He'd funded buildings like this before. Places designed to fix problems quickly and quietly. Inside, the air was cool and sharp with antiseptic. Polished floors reflected overhead lights, and every sound felt muted, controlled. Nathaniel checked in, shrugged off his tailored jacket, and waited. He told himself this would be fast. 15 minutes, maybe 20. Then back to the world that obeyed him. "Mr. Moore," a nurse called gently. He stood, straightened his cuffs, and followed her down a narrow hallway lined with certificates and framed awards. Proof of competence. Proof of trust. He barely glanced at them. The exam room was quiet when he entered. A desk. A monitor. A faint hum from unseen machines. Someone stood with their back to him, reviewing a file. "Good afternoon," the woman said, calm and professional. "I'll be handling your examination today." She turned. Nathaniel stopped breathing. Time seemed to fracture, the room tilting as his eyes locked onto hers. Naomi Carter stood before him, composed and unmistakable. Her posture was confident, her expression carefully neutral, a white coat draped over her shoulders like a boundary he couldn't cross. This wasn't the Naomi he remembered, tearful, pleading, standing in the shadow of his success. Years ago, this woman was steady, grounded, powerful in a way that had nothing to do with wealth. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then her eyes flicked briefly to his chart, and she said his name again, formally this time. "Please have a seat, Mr. Moore." And in that moment, Nathaniel understood this checkup was no longer about his health. It was about the past he never faced. "Before you begin, please take a moment to relax and enjoy the story. If you find it engaging, do me a small favor, subscribe, like, and share to support the channel. I'd also love to hear from you, so feel free to comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your support means a lot and helps grow our community. Nathaniel Moore had built his life on environments he could control, glass towers, private jets, boardrooms where silence bent to his will. The exam room offered none of that. It was too small, too clean, too quiet in a way that pressed against his ears. The paper on the examination table crinkled when he shifted, a petty sound that made him still again, jaw tightening. Across from him, Naomi Carter stood at the counter, reviewing his file. She didn't rush. She didn't fidget. The pen in her hand moved with calm precision, as if this were any other patient on any other afternoon. The white coat fit her like it had always belonged there. He hated that thought. Hated how natural she looked. Nathaniel fixed his gaze on the wall behind her, on the mounted monitor that reflected a dim outline of the room. He could feel his pulse in his throat. He told himself to breathe. This was a misunderstanding, a coincidence, a fluke of scheduling. He'd walk out in a few minutes and this strange, suffocating moment would dissolve. "Any recent changes in your sleep?" she asked, eyes still on the chart. Her voice was steady. Not sharp. Not soft. Professional. "Not really," he said, then corrected himself. "Work's been busy." She nodded once and wrote something down. The scratch of pen on paper sounded too loud. He watched the movement of her wrist, the neatness of it, and memory intruded late nights on a couch that smelled faintly of rain, her fingers tracing idle shapes as she listened to him plan a future that never included her. He swallowed and shifted again, the paper betraying him. "Blood pressure's elevated," Naomi said, finally turning toward him. Her eyes met his, and he felt the jolt again, like a door slammed open inside his chest. She didn't flinch. If there was anything behind her gaze, it stayed buried. Stress, he replied. It's temporary. Temporary stress has a habit of overstaying, she said, neutral, then gestured to the cuff on his arm. Relax. He almost laughed at that. Relax. The word hung between them, absurd and distant. He forced his shoulders down anyway, staring at a spot on the floor until the machine finished its low hum. She removed the cuff and stepped closer, and he noticed the faint scent of soap, clean and unfamiliar. Not the perfume she used to wear. That, at least, was a mercy. Heart rate's higher than average, she said. I'm fine. She paused, pen hovering. For the first time, she looked at him without the filter of the chart. Just a second. Enough to make his chest tighten. I'll decide that, she said evenly and moved on. Silence returned, thicker now. Nathaniel's mind worked against him, dragging up images he didn't want. Naomi at 25, barefoot in his kitchen, laughing at some private joke. Naomi standing in the rain, hair plastered to her cheeks. Eyes shining with something like hope he hadn't understood until it was gone. This Naomi was different. Straighter. Quieter. Stronger in a way that didn't reach for him. She checked his reflexes, her touch brief and impersonal. When she leaned in to listen to his heart, he felt the cool disc of the stethoscope through his shirt and the steady warmth of her presence just beyond it. He kept his eyes forward. He refused to look at her face. Breathe normally, she said. He did, counting the seconds, counting the ways this had gone wrong. He wanted to say her name, not the clipped, formal version she'd given him earlier, but the one that used to soften in his mouth. He wanted to ask questions that didn't belong in this room. He said nothing. When she stepped back, the space between them widened, a deliberate distance she seemed careful to maintain. She returned to the counter and reviewed her notes again, lips pressed in concentration. You've been pushing yourself, she said at last. Long hours. Minimal rest. It catches up. I manage, he replied. It came out sharper than he intended. She didn't react. Managing isn't the same as listening. There it was. Not accusation. Not tenderness. Just truth, delivered without ornament. He felt something twist, something old and familiar, her quiet insistence that he slow down, that he stay, that he choose something other than forward motion. Is there anything else? He asked, impatience edging his tone. I have a call. Naomi met his gaze again, and this time she held it. Her expression didn't change, but the air did. There's always more, she said. But for today, we'll start with the basics. She closed the file. The sound was final, a neat punctuation mark at the end of something unresolved. Nathaniel nodded once, grateful for the release and unsettled by how little it gave him. As she turned toward the door to fetch the nurse, he watched her go, the controlled line of her shoulders, the measured pace of her steps. Past and present refused to align. The woman he had known and the doctor before him occupied the same space without touching. And for the first time since he'd sat down, Nathaniel felt it clearly. The distance wasn't an accident. It was a boundary. One she had drawn, and one he no longer knew how to cross. Nathaniel remained seated after the door closed, staring at the place where Naomi had stood moments earlier. The room felt emptier without her, the quiet stretching thin and uncomfortable. He told himself it was ridiculous to feel unmoored by a single encounter. He had faced hostile takeovers and public scandals without blinking. Yet the simple memory of her presence lingered, tugging at something he'd kept buried for years. When she returned, a nurse trailing behind her to draw blood, Nathaniel barely registered the procedure. His attention stayed fixed on Naomi, on the way she spoke in short, efficient sentences, on how she supervised every detail with calm authority. This was her domain. The realization struck him harder than he expected. Once, he had been the center of her world. Now he was just another patient. As the nurse finished and quietly excused herself, Naomi reviewed the readings on the monitor. Your numbers suggest prolonged stress, she said. Not unusual, given your schedule, but not something to ignore either. I've handled worse, Nathaniel replied. It was a reflex, a defense he'd relied on all his life. She didn't look impressed. Handling isn't the same as healing. The words echoed something she used to say long ago, back when she'd wait for him to come home, back when she believed he would eventually choose her over his work. He remembered her sitting cross-legged on his couch, textbooks spread around her, eyes bright with ambition and faith in the future. She had believed in him then, believed he could be more than what he'd allowed himself to be. Now she stood several feet away, hands folded loosely in front of her, expression unreadable. The white coat seemed to emphasize the distance, a barrier as tangible as glass. "Do you remember?" he began, then stopped himself. The question felt inappropriate here, a relic of a past she clearly didn't wish to revisit. He cleared his throat. "What happens next?" Naomi met his eyes briefly. "Next, I refer you for further tests and recommend lifestyle adjustments." She said it without judgment, without warmth. "You'll receive a schedule before you leave." There it was again, that quiet authority. He realized, with a strange tightening in his chest, that she no longer sought his approval. She didn't need reassurance or promises. She had built something solid without him. As she turned to note something in the file, Nathaniel's thoughts drifted back to the woman she used to be. Naomi had once laughed easily, had leaned into him as if the world made sense when they stood together. He had taken that certainty for granted, assuming it would wait for him indefinitely. Seeing her now, composed and distant, forced him to confront how wrong he'd been. "You've done well for yourself," he said before he could stop himself. She paused, then inclined her head slightly. "I've done what I needed to do." The answer was polite, final. It left no room for interpretation, and that unsettled him more than anger would have. He felt a hairline fracture form in the armor he wore so effortlessly, the first hint that the power he valued so highly didn't extend here. Naomi finished her notes and closed the file, her movements precise. "We're done for today," she said. "Please schedule your follow-up at the front desk." He stood, smoothing his jacket, searching for something to say that might bridge the widening gap. Nothing came. She stepped aside to open the door, her posture professional, her gaze already elsewhere. As he walked past her, Nathaniel felt the truth settle heavily. Naomi Carter didn't belong to his past anymore. She had her own life, her own strength, and she no longer needed him to define it. The realization left him hollow, the first real crack in the certainty he'd carried for so long. He left the room quieter than he'd entered, carrying with him the unsettling knowledge that some wounds didn't fade, they simply learned to live beneath a white coat, waiting to be seen. Nathaniel returned to the exam room later that afternoon, summoned back for additional evaluations he hadn't bothered to question. Normally, he would have pushed back, rescheduled, delegated. Today, he simply complied. The thought unsettled him more than the tests themselves. Naomi was already there when he entered, standing beside the monitor, sleeves of her white coat rolled back slightly as she adjusted settings. She acknowledged him with a brief nod, nothing more. No awkwardness, no tension she was willing to name. Just calm authority. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the chair this time instead of the table. He did. The action felt strangely deliberate, like crossing an invisible line. He was used to rooms rearranging themselves around him. Here, he followed. She moved through the steps with practiced ease, explaining each one in a measured tone that left no room for argument. Blood work. Imaging. Follow-up monitoring. Nathaniel listened, absorbing instructions instead of issuing them. Each request, roll up your sleeve, lean back, hold still, peeled away another layer of the control he wore like a second skin. As she fitted sensors and checked readings, he became acutely aware of his own body in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. The quiet hum of machines, the steady blink of numbers on the screen, the pause before she wrote something down. It all made him feel exposed, reduced to data points he couldn't negotiate. "Any history of dizziness outside of work?" she asked, eyes on the monitor. "No," he said, then hesitated. "Occasionally." She glanced at him. Not sharply, just enough to signal that she'd noticed the shift. "How often is occasionally?" He exhaled. "More than I'd like." She nodded and continued typing. No commentary. No lecture. That somehow felt worse. He was used to people reacting, to excuses, to defiance, to charm. Naomi did none of it. She simply recorded the truth as he gave it. When was your last extended break? She asked.
He almost laughed.
I don't take breaks. Her hand stilled for a fraction of a second. Then she resumed. That's not what I asked. The words were neutral, but they landed with precision. He felt something tighten in his chest, not pain, not fear, but the uncomfortable awareness of being seen too clearly. I don't remember, he said finally. She turned toward him then, leaning lightly against the counter. Her expression remained professional, but there was an intensity in her gaze that made him straighten unconsciously. You understand that the body keeps score, she said. It responds whether you acknowledge it or not. I've built a life on pushing past limits, he replied. It sounded defensive even to his own ears. And you've succeeded, she said simply. That doesn't make you immune. There was no accusation in her voice.
No bitterness.
Just fact. The absence of blame stripped away his usual defenses, leaving him unsteady. He felt like a subject under glass, examined without cruelty, but without indulgence either. She asked about his diet, his sleep, his habits. Each question was precise, clinical, and yet threaded with something that made him uncomfortable, not judgment, exactly, but understanding. She knew him too well. Or perhaps she knew the version of him he'd never allowed himself to outgrow. As she wrapped up the examination, she handed him a printed summary. These are preliminary observations, she said. We'll know more after the additional tests. He took the paper, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact was accidental, fleeting, but it sent a sharp awareness through him. Naomi withdrew immediately, as if the moment had never happened. You'll need to follow the recommendations, she added. Consistently. I will, he said, surprising himself with how quickly the words came. She studied him for a moment, assessing not just his vitals, but his resolve.
The rain didn't just fall in the district, it punished. It was a cold, rhythmic drumming against the cracked pavement that seeped through the seams of Lynn Dawson's worn-out sneakers, turning her socks into a sodden, freezing weight. Lynn clutched her oversized hoodie tighter, her fingers trembling so violently she could barely keep her grip on the frayed fabric. Every breath was a conscious effort, a shallow, hitching rattle in a chest that felt perpetually constricted. She was a ghost walking among the living, her pale skin shimmering like wet porcelain under the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. She had been walking for nearly an hour, her body operating on a dwindling reserve of adrenaline and sheer, animal terror. Behind her, somewhere in the maze of tenement housing and narrow alleys, was the shadow of Curtis Pickens. She could still feel the phantom heat of his hand against her jaw, a memory that made her stomach roll with a wave of cold nausea. Her face throbbed in time with her heartbeat, a dull, aching reminder of why she was out here in the deluge. She needed to disappear. She needed to be anywhere but under the ceiling they shared, a place that had long ago ceased to be a home and had become a hunting ground. The exhaustion was beginning to win. It started as a heaviness in her knees, then a slow, creeping fog that clouded her thoughts. She had stopped buying real food a month ago to save for a bus ticket she never managed to buy. Now, her lack of nutrition was catching up to her. The world began to blur, the neon signs of the local liquor stores bleeding into long, jagged streaks of light. Up ahead, the atmosphere of the street shifted abruptly. The usual clutter of rusted sedans and overflowing trash bins gave way to a line of polished, black shadows. A motorcade. 3 armored SUVs sat idling at the curb, their engines emitting a low, predatory hum that vibrated in the soles of Lynn's feet. They looked like creatures from another world, clean.
The next phase of testing took longer than Nathaniel expected. By the time he was led back into the consultation room, irritation sat just beneath his skin, a familiar shield he slipped into easily. He was used to efficiency, to problems being identified and solved without unnecessary probing. This felt different. Personal. Naomi stood near the window this time, reviewing results on a tablet. The city beyond the glass looked distant, blurred by height and tinted panes. She didn't look up right away, and the silence stretched until it began to feel intentional. Your stress markers are elevated, she said finally. Consistently. I run companies, Nathaniel replied. Stress comes with the territory. So does burnout, she said, her tone even. And heart disease. He scoffed softly, crossing his arms. You're talking as if I'm fragile. Naomi lifted her eyes then. Not offended. Not defensive. Simply attentive. I'm talking as if you're human. The words landed harder than any diagnosis. Nathaniel shifted his weight, gaze flicking away. He wasn't accustomed to that framing. Human implied limits. Weakness. Needs. She continued unfazed. Any family history of cardiac issues?
No.
None at all, she pressed, fingers still as she waited. My father died young, he said shortly. Not from illness. She noted it without comment, but something in her expression sharpened, not with judgment, but concern. It unsettled him. And your mother? She asked. He hesitated. Alive. But not close. The question was gentle, almost incidental. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. I don't see how that's relevant. Family history isn't just medical, Naomi said. It's behavioral. Patterns repeat. There are no patterns, he said flatly. I built my life from nothing. I don't inherit mistakes. She studied him for a moment, the quiet in the room thickening. You inherit pressure, she said. Expectations. Coping mechanisms. He let out a short laugh, humorless. This is starting to sound like therapy. No, she replied calmly. It sounds like prevention. He looked at her then really looked at the steadiness in her posture, the way she didn't rise to his defensiveness or retreat from it. This wasn't the Naomi who used to soften when he raised his voice, who tried to bridge gaps he refused to acknowledge. This Naomi held her ground without effort. She scrolled through the tablet and asked, Do you live alone? That's none of your, he stopped himself, exhaling through his nose. Yes. Do you eat regular meals? I eat when I have time. Do you sleep? Enough. She waited. Most nights, he amended. Each question felt like a small incision, precise and clean, cutting closer to something raw. He tried to counter with confidence, with the authority that usually ended conversations before they grew uncomfortable. I've achieved what most people never will, he said. Whatever strain that comes with it, I can handle. Naomi set the tablet down and faced him fully. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't soften either. Achievement doesn't cancel consequences. The silence that followed was sharp, electric. Nathaniel felt it crackle under his skin. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, there was no immediate retort that felt sufficient. She spoke again more quietly. I'm not questioning your strength. I'm questioning the cost. There it was. The heart of it. Not an accusation, not a plea, an invitation to look closer. And that frightened him more than any test result. He turned away, staring at the city again. From this height, everything looked orderly, manageable. He wondered when he had started believing that distance equaled control. When Naomi continued, her questions shifted back to logistics, but the edge remained. Exercise habits. Coping mechanisms. Alcohol. Silence stretched between answers, weighted with everything they weren't saying. You don't rest, she said at last. You endure. I succeed, he corrected. She met his gaze. At surviving, maybe. The words settled between them. Uncomfortably true. Nathaniel felt something inside him strain, a pressure he had long ignored now demanding attention. He hated that she could see it, hated that she didn't need to point it out loudly for it to matter. As she picked up the tablet again, returning to her notes, he realized the tension in the room wasn't just professional. It was personal in a way that couldn't be dismissed or dominated. Every question had peeled him back another layer, not with force, but with clarity. And for the first time, Nathaniel understood that this examination wasn't just about his body. It was about the life he had built, and the cracks he'd refused to acknowledge until now. Nathaniel watched Naomi move around the room with that quiet authority that had always unnerved him. She flipped through his charts and test results, fingers tracing the lines of text with precision, her eyes scanning numbers, vitals, notes. He tried to focus on the monitors, the blinking lights, the rhythmic hum of the machines, but his attention kept drifting to the files she handled. It was then that he saw it, a name tucked into a section he hadn't expected to notice. It was small, almost casual in its placement, but the surname jumped out at him like a signal.
More.
Not his full name, just the surname, but enough. Enough to stop him in mid-breath and send the pulse in his ears hammering. He forced himself to look again, as if the paper might lie if he stared long enough. Nathaniel Moore Jr. The combination of familiarity and unfamiliarity hit him like cold water. He leaned back slightly, keeping his expression neutral, but his mind raced. He had been meticulous in every aspect of his life, yet this was a detail that had slipped past him entirely. A child carrying his name. Naomi noticed him glance at the file. She didn't flinch. Her lips pressed together in that same controlled line, eyes calm, unreadable. Nathaniel felt a jolt in his chest, sharp and disorienting. She had noticed his attention, and yet she said nothing.
No explanation. No acknowledgement.
Just continued her work, the same measured efficiency, as if nothing had shifted. He looked down at the file again, scanning the section she had left open. The child's age, routine checkups, growth metrics, everything was clinical, impersonal. But it wasn't enough to hide the implication. The subtlety, the careful wording, it all screamed at him. She wasn't going to volunteer information. She was letting him see, letting him realize without words. His thoughts spiraled. Memories he hadn't revisited in years came rushing back, the late nights with Naomi at his apartment, conversations about future. Families he had dismissed in pursuit of deals, nights when he had imagined a child without ever knowing he'd already fathered one. Every memory collided with the present, and the room seemed smaller, heavier, as though the walls themselves were pressing in. He cleared his throat, attempting a casual tone that sounded hollow even to him. Is this someone I should know about? Naomi didn't meet his eyes. She simply adjusted her tablet and continued scrolling through his test results. This is part of your medical overview, she said lightly. Her calmness only heightened his unease. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't answering either. Nathaniel shifted in his chair, trying to gather composure. Questions formed and dissolved before he could speak them aloud. Why hadn't he known? How long had she carried this secret? Was she testing him now, gauging his reaction? Every possibility was a sting. He could feel the tension knotting his chest, each heartbeat a reminder of what had been hidden from him all these years. Naomi finally looked up, just briefly, and her gaze caught his. There was nothing accusatory there. No emotion she was willing to reveal. Yet in that simple look, Nathaniel felt the weight of a truth he wasn't prepared for. It was deliberate. She controlled the narrative, and he was only beginning to see it. The file closed quietly, the soft snap echoing in the room like punctuation. Nathaniel exhaled, steadying himself, though his hands were tight fists in his lap. The room felt different now, charged with something unspoken. Naomi's presence was no longer just professional. It carried the silent knowledge of a life that intersected with his in a way he had never anticipated. He leaned back and considered his next move carefully. Any reaction, any misstep, could reveal more than he intended. And yet the seed of suspicion had taken root. Something was larger, something hidden, waiting just beneath the surface, and he knew without doubt that his world was about to shift. The rest of the examination passed in a blur. He answered questions mechanically, followed instructions with a controlled detachment, all while the name on the file lingered in his mind, echoing louder than any test result. By the time he left the room, he carried with him a quiet, unsettling certainty. This appointment was no longer about him alone. Something, or someone, had quietly changed the stakes. Nathaniel felt the weight of the file in his hands, the edges sharp against his palms, but it was the silence in the room that truly pressed against him. Naomi stood a few feet away, her posture unchanged, her eyes calm yet steady, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. He wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but the words lodged in his throat, heavy and unfamiliar. Finally, She set the file down and took a step closer. "Nathaniel," she began, her voice low, controlled, professional. "There's something you need to know." He straightened, a faint trace of arrogance creeping back, a futile attempt to assert dominance in a space where it no longer existed. I saw the file," he stammered, trying to mask the tremor in his own voice. What is this about?" Naomi exhaled slowly, steady as ever, and said the words that would fracture the life he thought he controlled. "That child, Nathaniel Moore Jr., he's yours." The air seemed to thin. Nathaniel's chest tightened, as if someone had pressed a hand over his heart. He blinked once, twice, certain he had misheard, that some cruel trick of coincidence had aligned the names. But her gaze didn't waver. Her voice carried the same certainty, the same calm authority that had unnerved him all morning. He shook his head, as if movement could dispel the truth. "That's impossible," he whispered. I mean you, when?" Naomi's expression softened just enough to betray the humanity behind the professional veneer, though she quickly recovered. "Years ago. Before you left. I didn't tell you because I didn't think you'd come back for him. I didn't think you would choose differently." The timeline clicked into place in his mind, every memory aligning with this revelation. The late nights, the decisions that had seemed trivial, the empty spaces he had filled with work instead of presence. He had walked away without knowing the consequence, without realizing that a piece of himself had stayed behind. And now that piece had a name. Nathaniel's knees felt weak. The chair he had been leaning against suddenly seemed too small, too fragile to support the weight of the revelation. Power, wealth, ego, they all fell away, leaving a raw, unguarded vulnerability he had not felt since he was a boy. The billionaire who had negotiated hostile takeovers with a calm hand, who had commanded respect in every boardroom he entered, was reduced to shock and disbelief. "Your son," Naomi continued, her tone still professional but softer now. "He's healthy. He's bright, curious, and he's been asking about you." Nathaniel's throat tightened. He had imagined success, strategy, influence, but never this. Never the responsibility, the bond, the irreplaceable life that had been quietly growing while he had been absent. His mind raced, a torrent of regret, longing, and disbelief clashing against the pride he had cultivated for decades. He moved to the window, staring out at the city below, familiar and indifferent, as if it had gone on without him noticing. Yet nothing below could compare to the storm within. He had always believed that money, status, and control could shield him from failure. Now he understood that some failures carried a weight no wealth could touch. Naomi stepped closer, but he didn't turn. He could feel her presence, steady and grounding, and it unnerved him further. "I never wanted to make this harder for you," she said. "I wanted you to have the choice when the time came." He shook his head again, the words sticking somewhere deep in his throat.
Un son?
"I have a son," he repeated, disbelief softening into something heavier, more tangible. "And you didn't tell me?" "I protected him," Naomi said simply. "I protected both of you." Nathaniel's hands clenched the edge of the windowsill. The reality of it all, the missed years, the absence, the consequences of his ambition, struck with a force that no business negotiation, no contract, no empire could have ever prepared him for. He realized, in a sudden, searing clarity, that this child was his responsibility, his legacy, and the embodiment of everything he had ignored. Power, wealth, and ego crumbled instantly, leaving Nathaniel more unarmored for the first time in decades. He felt the hollowness where certainty used to live, the echoing emptiness of choices made too quickly. And somewhere beneath the shock, beneath the guilt and the fear, there flickered a fragile, terrifying hope that it was not too late to show up, to rebuild, to be the father he had never been. He turned finally, eyes meeting Naomi's, and for the first time, he saw not just the professional before him, but the woman he had loved, the woman who had carried his son, and the quiet strength that had endured in his absence. The room held its breath with him, the weight of unspoken truths and unclaimed time pressing down, and Nathaniel understood that nothing in his world would ever be the same again. Nathaniel's hands trembled as he sank into the chair, the shock of the revelation still pulsing through him. He could feel the air between them crackle, heavy with all the words neither of them had said in years. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was sharp, broken, carrying the anger of decades bottled up in a single moment. Do you have any idea what it means to find out I have a son now? Naomi remained calm, almost impossibly so, her expression steady, but her eyes softened with something deeper. Pain, yes, but also a quiet determination. Because I couldn't trust you, she said plainly. Not then. Not when you left without looking back. You made your choices, Nathaniel. I had to make mine. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms. The anger surged, anger at her, at himself, at the years lost. I left for my empire. Do you think I wanted to? He broke off, realizing mid-sentence that no excuse could fill the emptiness his absence had caused. I didn't even know that he existed, that you carried him. How could I? You didn't know because I didn't tell you, she replied, tone measured but firm. And I left because staying meant watching you chase a life where there was no room for either of us. I protected him. I protected myself. And I protected you from your own mistakes. Her words cut through him sharper than any boardroom betrayal ever had. He had spent his life controlling outcomes, orchestrating every detail, yet here, Naomi had controlled the one truth that mattered most. And she had done it without malice, only necessity. The anger ebbed slowly, replaced by guilt so heavy it nearly bowled him over. He remembered the late nights when she had waited for him to come home, the empty dinners, the unanswered calls, the silent apartment where hope had once lived. He had built walls around his ambition, blind to the world he was abandoning in the process. He began, voice breaking. I should have known. I should have. He faltered, swallowing the lump in his throat. I failed you. I failed him. I failed us. Naomi's eyes softened, and for the first time, she let the distance slip just slightly. You did, Nathaniel. But mistakes don't define us. How we respond does. He shook his head, incredulous. I don't even know where to start. How do you forgive yourself for leaving someone who trusted you? For leaving a child who needed a father? I didn't expect forgiveness, she admitted. I expected survival. And I hoped, maybe, that if you were meant to, you'd step up one day. That's why I'm here now, not then. Because I knew the truth would have destroyed you before you were ready to face it. Nathaniel's chest ached with a mixture of longing, remorse, and something he couldn't quite name. He had loved her once, fiercely, recklessly, and entirely, and the remnants of that love still lingered, tangled with grief and shame. I never stopped loving you, he said quietly, words barely escaping. Even when I tried to bury it in work, in deals, in everything else. Naomi's gaze flickered, and for a brief heartbeat, her defenses faltered. And I never stopped loving you either, she confessed. But love isn't always enough. I needed more than words, Nathaniel. I needed presence. I needed a man who would stay. I needed someone who would choose differently. He exhaled, letting the tension in his shoulders ease slightly, though the weight in his chest remained. I see that now, he said, his voice quieter but steadier. I see what I lost. And I see how much I hurt you, how much I hurt him. I can't undo it, but he stopped, the enormity of the truth pressing down. I want to try. I have to try. Naomi studied him, reading the raw honesty in his eyes. She nodded slowly, the corners of her mouth twitching with the faintest trace of a smile, tinged with both hope and caution. Then start by acknowledging it, Nathaniel. Nathaniel, don't run from the consequences this time. He leaned forward, head bowed briefly, swallowed by the weight of his own guilt. I will. I swear it. For a long moment, silence hung between them, thick but no longer hostile. Anger, grief, resentment, and love all coexisted in the space, each emotion sharp, jagged, but real. The room felt smaller, the air closer, charged with possibility. Finally, Naomi spoke again, softer this time. We've made mistakes, she said. All of us. But the question now isn't who's to blame. It's what we do next. How we move forward. Together, if possible. Nathaniel lifted his eyes to hers, the pain still present, but tempered by clarity. Together, he echoed, voice steady, though the echo of unspoken love lingered between them. I want that. I'll do whatever it takes. For the first time in years, the air between them felt lighter, as if admitting the truth, the hurt, and the love could begin to repair what had been broken for so long. And though the past could not be undone, the present offered something neither of them had dared hope for, a chance to begin again. Nathaniel sat in the quiet of the exam room, the weight of Naomi's words pressing into him like gravity. His mind spun with every way he could fix this: luxury tutors, private estates, high-end doctors, financial endowments. Everything he owned, everything he commanded, suddenly felt like it should be enough to make this right. Yet Naomi's steady gaze reminded him that some things weren't bought, negotiated, or controlled. I can provide for him, he began, voice firm but tinged with desperation. I can give him the best of everything. The finest schools, the safest neighborhoods, the best care money can buy. Naomi held up a hand, stopping him before he could go further. Nathaniel, she said calmly, her tone gentle but unwavering. He doesn't need your empire. He needs his father. The words hit him harder than any blow. Not his wealth, not his influence, not his meticulous plans. None of it mattered here. He had spent his life equating value with control, with numbers on spreadsheets, with accolades and deals. And now, for the first time, he realized the one thing he wanted most couldn't be secured by any of it. I just want to do right by him, he admitted, voice raw, unpracticed. I want to be there. I can't change the past, but I can make the future better. Naomi's expression softened, but her resolve remained. You can't buy a relationship, Nathaniel. You can't fix years of absence with possessions or gestures. That's not how trust works. That's not how love works. You have to show up, consistently, without expecting control or results immediately. He swallowed, realizing how foreign humility felt against the instincts he had honed over decades. The urge to orchestrate, to manage outcomes, to assert dominance, all of it fought against the truth she spoke. Yet beneath the unease, a flicker of clarity glimmered. She was right. Everything he thought would solve the problem, money, influence, control, was meaningless if he couldn't first be present, accountable, human. I understand, he said finally, quieter now, stripped of pretense. I want the chance to be there, not to own him, not to dictate his life, just to be his father. Naomi studied him, searching for traces of ego, of manipulation, of performative remorse. When she found none, a subtle nod acknowledged the first step of genuine accountability. She didn't smile, didn't soften completely, but the tension in her shoulders eased slightly, a signal that this was the beginning, not the resolution. I'll give you that, she said. But this isn't a single decision, Nathaniel. It's every day, every choice, every action. You have to be willing to show up, not because you want recognition, but because it matters to him. He exhaled, the words sinking in. Show up. Be present. No shortcuts, no wealth, no empire could substitute for that. And in that moment, he felt the weight of his ego, long accustomed to bending the world to his will, loosen. The need for control, the compulsion to fix everything instantly, faded just enough to let something more profound take root. Humility. I can do that, he said, his voice steady now, carrying an honesty he hadn't allowed himself before. I'll do whatever it takes. Not because I can buy it, but because he deserves me. Because he's my son. Naomi met his gaze for a long moment, eyes piercing yet calm. Then start there, she said. Everything else follows. Nathaniel nodded, feeling the first true shift in his perspective. The realization was simple, yet revolutionary. Some victories aren't measured in money or power, but in patience, presence, and consistency. For the first time, he didn't want to dominate or control. He simply wanted to belong where he had once failed to. He rose slowly, letting go of the illusions that had once defined him. I'm ready, he said, the words carrying weight, promise, and a vulnerability he had never revealed to anyone before. I'm ready to earn it, day by day, step by step. Naomi allowed a faint exhale, not relief, not surrender, but acknowledgement. The room seemed to shift, lighter somehow, though the road ahead remained long, uncertain and demanding. Nathaniel understood that this was only the beginning, a choice that money could never buy, a responsibility that no deal could ever fulfill. And for the first time, he embraced the power of surrender, the power to be present, accountable, and human. The power to love without conditions, without control, without pretense. The power to finally do right, not with wealth, but with himself. Nathaniel walked into the softly lit nursery, the faint hum of a baby monitor filling the otherwise still air. His heart thudded in his chest, not with the calculated rhythm of a boardroom victory, but with something raw and unsteady, a pulse that belonged entirely to this moment. He had imagined this encounter countless times, every scenario polished, controlled, perfected. None of it had prepared him for the reality. Nathaniel Moore Jr. lay in a crib, small and fragile, a perfect blend of features he recognized immediately. Soft curls, wide eyes, the curve of a tiny chin that mirrored his own. The child stirred slightly as Nathaniel approached, lifting his head to regard him with curious, trusting eyes. Nathaniel stopped just short of the crib, unwilling to force contact, aware that presence mattered more than words or gestures. Naomi stood a few feet away, arms loosely crossed, watching him carefully. There was no warmth yet in her expression, just quiet vigilance. Nathaniel knew she was measuring his intent, his patience, his ability to step into a role he had long avoided. He welcomed it. He needed her scrutiny. He knelt slowly beside the crib, careful not to startle the baby. "Hello," he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper, though every syllable carried a weight of apology, wonder, and hope. The baby blinked up at him, tiny hands curling and uncurling, and Nathaniel felt the first stirrings of a connection that had been absent for far too long. Naomi watched him, her posture relaxed but alert. She had prepared herself for disappointment, for excuses wrapped in charm or wealth, for the old Nathaniel who sought to control rather than nurture. But this quiet presence was different. She said nothing, allowing the space to exist, to breathe, to grow naturally. Nathaniel rested his hands lightly on the edge of the crib, feeling the warmth and fragility of life he had never held before. He didn't reach too far, didn't try to command the child's attention. He simply allowed himself to be there, a steady presence, offering safety without expectation. Each small movement, each soft breath from the crib, resonated through him, dissolving layers of pride he hadn't known he clung to so tightly. "This is him," Naomi said finally, her voice low, almost reverent. She didn't move closer, didn't guide him. She simply stated a truth that needed no embellishment. Nathaniel nodded, absorbing the simplicity of her words, the quiet authority behind them. He exhaled, allowing a small smile to touch his lips, fragile and unpracticed. "He's incredible," he murmured, the words honest, unguarded. "I don't deserve him, not yet." Naomi's lips quirked slightly, almost a smile, but her eyes remained watchful. "You'll earn the chance," she said, "day by day, step by step. Not perfection, Nathaniel, just presence. That's what he needs." Nathaniel nodded again, taking the advice to heart. He leaned closer, adjusting the small blanket around his son with gentle hands, careful not to startle him. "I'll be here," he said softly, voice steady with sincerity. "Whenever he needs me, I'll stay." The room remained quiet, save for the soft coos and the steady hum of the monitor. No grand gestures, no dramatic speeches, no declarations of wealth or power. Only presence. Only accountability. Only the beginning of trust. He felt a weight lift, the tension that had clung to him for years easing, replaced with something tentative but undeniable. Hope. Naomi moved slightly, taking a seat nearby, but still giving him space. She didn't speak, didn't direct, didn't intrude. Her presence alone, calm, cautious, observant, was enough. Nathaniel understood that healing would not be immediate, that forgiveness and trust would be earned slowly. But for the first time, he felt capable of that effort. He reached out gently, brushing a curl back from the child's forehead, and Nathaniel Moore Jr. responded with a tiny, trusting sigh. The simplicity of the moment, the unadorned connection, tore at the remnants of his ego, leaving him raw and human, present and vulnerable. Nathaniel lifted his eyes to Naomi, who returned his gaze without judgment. For the first time in years, there was no anger, no resentment, no tension. Only the quiet possibility that what had been broken could be mended, not perfectly, but honestly. And in that small, quiet room, Nathaniel understood the truth he had been resisting for so long. Pride could be set aside, control could be relinquished, and love could begin its work, not with grandeur, but with presence, humility, and patience. He stayed there, kneeling beside the crib, watching his son sleep, feeling a bond slowly take root. Outside the room, the world continued as it always had, indifferent to his wealth and influence. Inside, everything had shifted. Healing had begun where pride ended, and Nathaniel Moore, for the first time, was ready to be the man his son needed him to be. True power isn't control. It's showing up when it matters most. Thank you so much for watching this story to the end, Red Heart. Your time, your attention, and your support mean more than you know. If this story touched your heart in any way, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it today. More powerful stories are coming. Speech balloon comment below. Where are you watching from? I'd love to see your country or city in the comments, backhand index pointing down.